Hey, I'm glad you're joining me here today on the Genesis Radio Network. We're still focusing on Louisiana, the terrible oil tragedy down here. And I give you a few thoughts. I wrote a column this week about raising the question, did Louisiana make a deal with the devil? And I'm basing that on a cross-section of commentary. Oil's been good to this state in terms of money's coming in, but was it good enough? Was it worth the trade-offs? You know, back in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, if you looked at most of the southern states, they all were about the same level, all behind the rest of the country, but all in the same economic and environmental league. Then Louisiana went to oil. States like Alabama, Georgia, Arkansas, Florida, so many of those states had no oil and gas, and so their oil and gas is in the minds of their 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th graders. They had to concentrate on education. And if you look at a comparison of southern states, most of those state universities rank much higher in terms of endowment, in terms of PhD programs, in terms of rankings than does the state university in Louisiana, LSU, and the other universities as a comparison. So their emphasis was education, and the proof is in the pudding in terms of the huge car plants and so much that's happened in all those other states. Louisiana took it on oil. And again, oil created a lot of jobs, brought a lot of money in. When I first got into the state legislature back in 1971, 40% of the entire state budget was based on oil and gas revenue. Now today it's dropped down to probably 8 or 9%, if that much. Could be 5%. I think it's $150 billion coming in, rather, I'm sorry, 1.5 billion. That's what it is, 1.5 billion out of some $30 billion budget. So as you can see, it's dropped very dramatically in terms of the overall income. In the blame game going on down here, everybody's blaming everybody. BP, British Petroleum, is blaming the other partners they had in the well. The federal government is blaming BP and say they have the full responsibility. The state's blaming the federal government. Everybody's blaming everybody. But there's an interesting article in one of the local papers, the Times-Picayune down here this week, saying that, quite frankly, we created a climate by our congressional delegation not insisting that the proper checks and balances be put in place when all these oil wells are drilled down here. And so if you're going to not build in those checks and balances, you've got to pay the piper. You've got to pay the price. By the way, the money coming in is significant, but it could have been a heck of a lot more. The trade-off would have made much more sense. Back in it was back in 1948, President Truman at the time wanted to give Louisiana 2/3 of all the oil off to the 3-mile limit, and then 1/3 beyond that as far as the Gulf went out. Louisiana said, no, that's not good enough, and so we turned it down. The case went to the United States Supreme Court. Louisiana lost and got nothing. If Louisiana would have made that deal, the income to the state since 1948 would have been approximately $500 billion. Not million, but $1 billion. It was probably the worst financial decision in the history of any state in the country, any country in the world. So it was a real mess up, and now, again, Louisiana is paying a heck of a price. So in any event, I guess the questions raised were, was Louisiana the good stewards? Because they're going to pay a heck of an environmental price, not just in the short run, but as bad as this oil spill is going, it's going to be there for many, many years to come. And so lessons learned is, it's great to have the benefits, great to have the income, but you sure ought to be sure. Consider the worst case scenario is going to happen. If it does, be sure you build in the proper environmental protections, the proper checks and balances. Hey, I'll come back and take your phone calls right after this message right here on the Jim Brown Show on the Genesis Radio Network.